If you're settling in from London, the countryside, or anywhere across the world where love stories still make your heart race, welcome. You're about to witness a moment that will change two lives forever. Stay with us. In the gilded drawing room of Blackmere Court, Lady Althea Morland stood beside the tall window overlooking the moonlit gardens, her ivory fan moving in practiced rhythm as she observed the evening's carefully orchestrated gathering. At 22, Althea had mastered the art of appearing serene while her mind worked like clockwork beneath the surface, golden curls arranged in fashionable ringlets, pearl necklace gleaming at her throat, and a composure that her late mother, Lady Sabina Morland, had called both her greatest asset and her most dangerous weapon. Her father, the Marquis Gideon Morland, had warned her that a lady who saw too much and said too little would either make a brilliant match or die a spinster. Althea had learned to accept both possibilities with equal grace. "You're doing it again," her younger sister, Isidora, whispered, appearing at her elbow with two crystal glasses of wine in each hand. "That look you get when you're cataloguing everyone's secrets like a ledger book." Althea accepted the glass with the ghost of a smile. "I cannot help it if people wear their intentions so plainly. See there, Lord Ambrose Fenton will announce his daughter's engagement within minutes. Lady Millicent Price is already calculating how much the wedding will cost. And someone will certainly ask our host about his recent acquisition of the Bristol Shipping Company." "Speaking of our host," Isidora said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Have you actually seen the Duke yet? They say he's absolutely ruthless. Father mentioned he destroyed Mr. Rupert Rookwood's reputation over a single business disagreement. Reduced them to nothing in a fortnight. Men don't destroy families over business alone, Isidora. There's always more to such stories. Then explain why every gentleman here looks ready to flee at his approach, and every lady looks torn between fear and fascination." Althea had heard the rumors, naturally. Who hadn't? Duke Severin Blackmere, 32 years old, inherited his dukedom at 19 after a scandal that killed his father, Duke Alaric Blackmere, an elder brother in a single night, now commanded wealth from lead mines in Derbyshire, cloth halls in Leeds, and a shipping empire that stretched from Bristol to Hull and beyond to the Indies. But it was his reputation that entered rooms before he did, cold, merciless, brilliant in strategy, and utterly untouchable. A man who had turned his back on society after burying his family, only to return 3 years ago with an empire and a presence that made even the most powerful lords uncomfortable. "There he is," Isidora breathed, and Althea followed her gaze across the drawing room. She understood immediately why women whispered behind their fans. Duke Severin Blackmere stood near the marble fireplace, impossibly tall and commanding in midnight blue evening dress that seemed tailored to make him look like a predator among prey, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a face of sharp, aristocratic beauty that could have been carved by a master sculptor, with eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched. He wasn't handsome in the gentle, approachable way of London's favored gentleman. He was something far more dangerous. Compelling. The sort of man who could ruin you with a glance or save you with a word. "Dear God," Isidora murmured. "The rumors don't do him justice. He's simply a man, Isidora. A man who looks like he could buy your future with one hand and destroy your past with the other." Althea was about to respond when Mr. Silas Hogreave's voice rang out. "Distinguished guests, His Grace requests your presence in the dining hall. Dinner is served." The procession into the dining room followed the rigid protocol of rank. Dukes first, followed by marquises, then earls and their families in descending order. Althea found herself seated midway down the impossibly long mahogany table with Isidora on her right and the elderly Countess Dorothea Felton on her left, who immediately began complaining about the draught from the windows. The Duke sat at the head of the table naturally, with Viscount Percival Rookwood and his wife, Lady Honoria Rookwood, positioned close by in seats of honor. Percival Rookwood was a man of careful smiles and calculated ambitions, his receding hairline compensated by expensive tailoring and an air of importance he wore like armor. His wife, Lady Honoria, possessed the kind of practiced beauty that came from years of perfecting every gesture, dark hair arranged in elaborate coils, emerald necklace at her throat that must have cost more than most families earned in a year, and eyes that never stopped assessing, measuring, calculating. Althea had met them both briefly upon arrival. Something about the couple made her instinctively uncomfortable, though she couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the way Percival's compliments felt like business propositions, or how Honoria's laughter seemed just a touch too perfectly timed, too rehearsed. If you're watching from your bedroom, your living room, or stealing a moment during your commute, we want to know, where in the world are you joining us tonight? Drop a comment. Your presence matters to this story. The first course arrived, a delicate consommé that steamed in fine porcelain bowls. Conversation flowed around her in waves of meaningless pleasantries. Lord Ambrose discussed his daughter's upcoming presentation at court, just as Althea had predicted. Lord Octavian Trelawney debated the merits of a new irrigation system for his estate. Isidora kicked Althea under the table and nodded toward Mr. Benedict Calder across from them, who'd been staring for the past 5 minutes. Mr. Calder, Isidora whispered. Heir to the Calder industrial fortune. Father mentioned him last week. Father mentions many gentlemen. I'm not a racehorse to be auctioned. No, but you are 22 and showing no signs of accepting any proposals. At this rate, you'll end up like Aunt Euphemia, living alone in Frome with 12 cats and Wellington the parrot. Aunt Euphemia is perfectly happy, and Wellington is excellent company. The second course arrived, then the third. Althea found herself relaxing slightly, the wine and food softening the edges of her usual social anxiety. Perhaps this evening wouldn't be as tedious as she'd feared. Perhaps. Her thoughts stopped abruptly. Lady Honoria Rookwood had risen from her seat, ostensibly to speak with Lady Verena Holt several chairs away. But as she passed behind the Duke's chair, Althea caught a movement so quick, so subtle that she almost dismissed it as imagination. Almost. Lady Honoria's hand, concealed within the folds of her silk gown, withdrew something small, a tiny glass vial, no larger than Althea's thumb. The movement was practiced, smooth, the gesture of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in private. As Percival engaged the Duke in animated conversation about shipping routes to Hull, gesturing expansively enough to draw attention, his wife's fingers moved with surgical precision. The vial tipped. A clear liquid, barely visible in the candlelight, just a few drops, splashed into the Duke's wine glass. Althea's heart slammed against her ribs. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching like honey. Lady Honoria slipped the vial back into her gown, her expression never changing, her smile remaining perfectly in place. Percival laughed at something the Duke said, his hand clapping Severin's shoulder in a gesture of false camaraderie. No one else had seen it. The entire room continued their conversations, oblivious. The Duke reached for his wine glass. Althea didn't think. She simply moved. Rising from her chair so quickly it scraped against the floor, she crossed the space between her seat and the Duke's in 4 swift strides. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes, but her focus remained fixed on that wine glass rising toward those storm-gray eyes. Don't drink that, she murmured urgently, her hand shooting out. The wine glass tilted. Red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth in a spreading stain that looked disturbingly like blood. The crystal struck the table with a sharp crack but didn't shatter. Silence crashed over the room like a physical force. The Duke's eyes, those infamous cold eyes, fixed on her face. Up close they were even more intense than she'd imagined, containing depths that seemed to calculate 1,000 possibilities in the space of a heartbeat. And in that moment, as the entire room held its breath and her reputation hung by a thread, Lady Althea Morland realized she'd just bet her entire future on 3 drops of poison she might have imagined. The Duke's lips parted. And the world waited. The Duke's storm-gray eyes held hers for what felt like an eternity, and Althea braced herself for the humiliation that would surely follow. Around them, the dining hall had transformed into a theater of whispers. Lady Millicent Price's fan fluttered like a trapped bird, Lord Ambrose Fenton's mouth hung open in undisguised shock, and Isidora's face had gone pale as moonlight. Even Countess Dorothea Felton had stopped complaining about drafts, her ancient eyes wide with something between horror and fascination. Lady Althea, Duke Severin Blackmere said, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried through the absolute silence. He rose from his chair with predatory grace, his considerable height making her feel suddenly small despite her own tall frame. "You've just spilled a rather expensive Bordeaux across my table." "Your wine was poisoned," Althea said, forcing steel into her voice even as her hands trembled. She turned to face the room, her finger pointing directly at Lady Honoria Rookwood. "I saw her. She put something in your glass while her husband distracted you with conversation about Hull." The gasp that rippled through the assembly sounded like wine through dead leaves. Lady Honoria's expression shifted through a masterful performance, surprise, confusion, then wounded dignity. "I beg your pardon?" Her hand flew to her throat, fingers touching the emerald necklace as though seeking protection. "Your Grace, I have never been so insulted in my entire life. I merely rose to speak with Lady Verena about her daughter's wedding arrangements." "She's lying," Althea insisted, but even to her own ears the words sounded desperate, unhinged. "I saw the vial. She dropped something into the wine." Percival Rookwood stood, his face a careful mask of concern and barely restrained outrage. "Lady Althea, I understand you've been under considerable strain. Your father mentioned your sensitivity, your tendency toward nervous imaginings. Perhaps the excitement of the evening has overwhelmed you." The room erupted in murmurs. Althea felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Lady Verena Holt leaned toward her companion, whispering behind her fan. Mr. Benedict Calder looked torn between embarrassment and pity. Even Isidora seemed uncertain, her eyes darting between Althea and the Rookwoods with visible confusion. "She's mad," someone whispered. Althea thought it might have been Lady Ianthe Corwin. "Seeking attention. How desperate." "Poor Marquis Morland," another voice added. "First the mother dies, now the daughter's lost her wits." Althea's vision blurred with furious tears she refused to shed. This was it. Her reputation, her family's standing, her future, all of it crumbling because she'd acted on instinct, because she'd seen something no one else had witnessed, because she'd dared to speak truth in a room full of pretty lies. The Duke raised his hand, and silence fell like an executioner's blade. For those of you watching who've ever been called crazy for seeing what others refuse to see, who've stood alone with the truth, this moment is for you. You're not alone. Neither is she. "Mr. Hogreave," Duke Severin commanded, his eyes never leaving Althea's face. "Summon Dr. Lionel Ashcombe immediately. Have him bring his examination equipment. And fetch Mr. Edwin Colfax, tell him to preserve the wine glass and its contents. No one touches anything until they arrive." The butler disappeared like smoke. The Duke took a step closer to Althea, so close she could see the flecks of silver in his dark hair, smell the faint scent of sandalwood and something indefinably masculine. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to a tone meant only for her, but in the deathly quiet room, everyone heard. "I trust you." 3 words. Simple. Devastating. They hit Althea like a physical force, stealing her breath and replacing her fear with something far more dangerous, hope. The Duke turned to address the room, but his hand found hers, his fingers warm and solid and real, anchoring her to this moment when the entire world seemed determined to call her mad. "Lady Althea has made a serious accusation," he announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a man who commanded empires and bent entire markets to his will. "It will be investigated thoroughly. If poison is found in that wine, I will know who put it there. And if someone attempted murder in my home, at my table, they will answer for it with everything they possess." His gaze swept across the assembly and landed on the Rookwoods like a judgment. Percival's careful composure cracked just slightly, a muscle twitching in his jaw, a tightness around his eyes. Lady Honoria's smile remained in place, but something cold and calculating moved behind her gaze. "This is preposterous," Percival blustered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "You cannot seriously entertain these wild fantasies. The girl is clearly unwell, suffering from some feminine hysteria. If Lady Althea is wrong," the Duke cut him off with surgical precision, "she will bear the consequences. But if she's right..." He paused, letting the weight of unspoken threats hang in the air. If she's right, I suggest whoever is responsible begins making peace with their gods. Within the hour, Dr. Lionel Ashcombe arrived at Blackmere Court with a leather case full of glass vials and testing equipment that looked more suited to an alchemist's laboratory than a physician's office. He was a thin man with intelligent eyes and hands that moved with practiced precision as he examined the spilled wine, scraping samples from the tablecloth, collecting drops from the overturned glass. The assembled guests watched in fascinated horror as their elegant dinner party transformed into something from a Gothic novel. Some made excuses and departed, Lord Ambrose pleading an early morning commitment, Lady Millicent suddenly remembering a prior engagement. Others stayed, drawn by morbid curiosity or the desire to witness the scandal firsthand. The Duke had insisted Althea remain close, installing her in his private study with Isidora while Dr. Ashcombe conducted his examination. The room smelled of leather and old books, with floor-to-ceiling shelves holding volumes in Latin, Greek, and languages Althea couldn't identify. A fire crackled in the hearth, but she felt cold to her bones. "Thea," Isidora whispered, using her childhood name. "Are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" "I'm certain." But even as she said it, doubt crept in like fog. Had she really seen it? The vial had been so small, the movement so quick. What if she'd imagined it? What if Percival was right, and she was suffering some feminine hysteria, some nervous condition inherited from her mother's melancholic tendencies? The door opened. Dr. Ashcombe entered, followed by the Duke. The physician's face was grave. "Your Grace, Lady Althea," he began, setting his case on the desk with careful deliberation. "I've completed my preliminary examination of the wine and tablecloth samples." The silence stretched unbearably. Althea's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment that would either vindicate her or destroy her. Dr. Ashcombe opened his case and withdrew a small glass vial containing a dark residue. "The wine contained belladonna," he announced quietly. "Deadly nightshade. A concentrated enough dose to kill a man of the Duke's size within the hour. Painful, violent, and nearly impossible to treat once symptoms begin." The room tilted. Althea gripped the arm of her chair to steady herself. She'd been right. Someone had tried to murder Duke Severin Blackmere in front of 50 witnesses. And she was the only one who'd seen it happen. The Duke crossed to where she sat, kneeling so their eyes were level. His hand covered hers, warm and solid and real. "I trust you," he repeated, and this time Althea understood the weight those words carried. In a world built on doubt and pretty lies, he'd chosen to believe her. A stranger. A woman. Someone with everything to lose and nothing to gain but truth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't thank me yet, Lady Althea." His expression hardened into something dangerous and beautiful. "We've just painted a target on your back. The Rookwoods know you saw them. They know I believe you. And desperate people do desperate things when cornered." As the magnitude of what she'd done crashed over her, the danger, the scandal, the impossible position she'd put herself in, Althea realized her life had changed irrevocably. There would be no going back to quiet observation from the sidelines, no return to the safety of being overlooked. She'd stepped into the light, and now she would have to face whatever came next. The Duke still held her hand. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. If you're still with us, drop a comment with one word describing how you're feeling right now. Because this story is just beginning, and we need you here for what comes next. The investigation began at dawn. Althea woke in the guest chambers of Blackmere Court to find Isidora curled beside her, having refused to leave despite the impropriety. Pale morning light filtered through damask curtains, and for a moment she could almost pretend the previous night had been a fever dream. Then she saw the wine stain on her glove, dark as blood, permanent as memory, and reality came crashing back. By the time she'd dressed and descended to the morning room, the Duke had already dispatched Mr. Tobias Rennick to London to investigate the Rookwoods' financial affairs. Mr. Edwin Colfax stood by the windows reporting that the Viscount and his wife had departed at first light, claiming urgent business in Sussex. Their hasty retreat spoke volumes. "They've run," Althea said, accepting tea from Matthew Blythe, whose hand trembled slightly as he poured. "They've retreated to regroup," Severin corrected, his storm-grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "They believe they have time. They're wrong." For the next week, Althea found herself drawn into a world she'd only observed from the sidelines. The Duke's study became their war room, maps spread across mahogany surfaces, ledgers documenting mounting debts, correspondence revealing desperate attempts to secure loans. Mr. Tobias Rennick arrived from London with news that made even Severin's controlled expression darken. Percival Rookwood owed over £50,000, with debts coming due within the month. "Killing you would solve his problems," Althea said quietly, tracing a ledger entry. "Your death would trigger the insurance policy on your joint shipping venture. £20,000. Not enough to save him, but enough to buy time." Severin moved beside her, close enough that she felt his warmth. Desperate men believe time will save them. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition of a shared understanding that the world was not the pretty place society pretended it was. That evening, as servants lit lamps against gathering darkness, her father arrived. The Marquis Gideon Morland found her in the conservatory, where winter roses bloomed despite the season. "Tell me the truth, Thea," he said. "All of it." So she did. When she finished, her father was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother once told me that women who see clearly are dangerous to those who profit from blindness." He paused, and his voice cracked. "She was right. And she paid the price." Althea's throat tightened. "Father. You were 14. He turned to face her fully, his eyes wet. "Do you remember what happened? Really remember?" She did. God help her, she did. The memory rose like bile, her mother standing in the textile mill courtyard, confronting the owner about children working 16-hour shifts. Lady Sabina Morland had been speaking to a crowd of workers when the factory owner's son drove his carriage through at full speed. Whether accident or intent was never proven. Althea had watched her mother's body break against cobblestones. Watched the blood spread in patterns like spilled wine. Watched her father scream and scream while everyone stood frozen. The mill owner paid the family off. The son faced no charges. And Althea learned that justice was a luxury the powerful granted selectively. That night, as she'd washed her mother's blood from her dress, the fabric stained so deeply it would never come clean, Althea had made a promise: she would never look away from truth. Never accept comfortable lies. Never let fear silence her when speaking might save someone. It was that promise that made her spill the wine. "I remember," she whispered now, tears streaming down her face. "I remember washing her blood from my hands. I remember the mill owner's son smiling at the inquest. I remember everyone calling it an unfortunate accident when we all knew. Her father pulled her into his arms. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Thea. You acted when she couldn't. You saved someone when I failed to save her. You didn't fail. I stood there helpless. Just like everyone else." His voice broke. "But you didn't. You moved. You acted. You refused to be helpless. That's her legacy, living in you." They held each other in the conservatory, surrounded by roses that bloomed against all reason, while grief they'd carried for 8 years finally found words. Later that night, Severin found Althea in the library. She'd sought refuge among books but couldn't focus. He entered carrying 2 glasses of wine, different vintage, she noted with dark humor, and sat beside her with casual intimacy. "I spoke with your father," he said. "And?" "He told me about your mother. About how she died." His hand found hers. "Althea, I'm so sorry. To witness that as a child. It taught me that silence kills." She met his eyes. "If I'd said nothing last night, you'd be dead. And I'd spend the rest of my life washing blood from my hands again, only this time it would be yours." "I couldn't," her voice cracked. "I couldn't watch someone else die when I could prevent it." Severin's expression transformed into something tender and odd. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. "I'm haunted." "You're brave." "I'm keeping a promise to my dead mother." "You're all of those things." His hand rose to cup her cheek. "And you're unlike anyone I've ever met." The kiss tasted of grief and wine and promises kept despite cost. When they broke apart, Severin rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to marry you," he said. "Not a question. A statement of fact." "That's presumptuous." "That's inevitable." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "If you'll have me." Althea thought of her mother's courage. Her father's grief. The blood she'd washed from her hands at 14. The wine she'd spilled at 22. The long line of women who'd spoken truth and paid prices and refused to be silenced. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. For everyone watching who's ever kept a promise to someone who's gone, this is for you. You're not alone. Stay with us." The engagement announcement in the Times caused precisely the sensation the Rookwoods had hoped to avoid. Society's gossip was vicious, spectacular, utterly inescapable. Lady Millicent Price declared it a marriage built on shared madness. Mr. Benedict Calder avoided Althea's gaze at functions. The cruelest cuts came from women who'd once called themselves friends, ladies who whispered that Althea had orchestrated everything to trap a duke. "Let them talk," Isidora said fiercely, but even her voice lacked conviction. The worst came 3 weeks later at the Pantheon on Oxford Street. As Althea and Isidora entered for a musical evening, conversation died like a snuffed candle. Women turned their backs in the deliberate cut direct, the social death sentence. "Perhaps we should leave," Isidora whispered. "No." Althea lifted her chin. "We stay." They stayed. For 2 excruciating hours, they endured pointed stares and whispered insults. When Lady Ianthe Corwin loudly proclaimed that some women will do anything for a title, including invent murderous plots, Althea felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to shed them. Then the Duke arrived. He walked directly to Althea, bowed with formal courtesy, and offered his arm. As they circulated through the room, his voice dropped to a tone meant only for her. "You don't have to endure this. Running won't stop their whispers." "No, but it will stop you from hearing them." "I can bear whispers." She glanced up at him. "What I cannot bear is cowardice." When they returned home to Moorland Park that night, Althea felt the pressure building like steam in a kettle. She made it to her chambers before the seal finally cracked. She was dressing for bed when her hands started shaking. The pearl necklace slipped through her fingers. Her breath came in short gasps. The room tilted. She saw Lady Honoria's hand moving toward the wine glass, over and over, a loop her brain couldn't escape. Saw the crystal rising to Severin's lips. Saw him dying in infinite variations her mind invented, poison working slowly, eating him from inside, while she watched helplessly just like she'd watched her mother. "I can't breathe," she gasped, sliding down the wall. "I can't." Isidora found her on the floor minutes later, gasping like a drowning woman, tears streaming, body shaking so violently her teeth chattered. "Thea. What's happening?" "I killed him." The words tore from her throat. "What if I imagined it? What if there was no poison and I ruined his life for nothing? What if I'm mad like they say and I've destroyed everything, my family, his reputation, everyone who stood by me?" "You're not mad. The poison was real." Dr. Ashcombe confirmed. "But what if I'm wrong about other things? What if my mind breaks like Mother's did at the end? What if I can't trust my own eyes anymore?" She was sobbing now, ugly and raw. "I watched her die. I washed her blood from my hands. And now I see blood everywhere, in the wine, in my dreams, in every shadow. Breathe, Thea. Just breathe." But she couldn't. The panic had her in its teeth and wouldn't let go. All the strength she'd forced herself to maintain, all the courage she'd performed for society, all the certainty she'd projected, it shattered like crystal against stone. When Severin found them an hour later, Althea was still curled on the floor, exhausted from crying, hollowed out and fragile as blown glass. He didn't ask questions. Just gathered her into his arms and held her while she shook. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm supposed to be strong and I can't. You've been strong for months, Althea. Carrying poison and scandal and society's cruelty and your mother's death and the weight of keeping a promise to someone who's gone." His arms tightened. Even the strongest foundations crack under enough pressure. "Let yourself break. I'll hold the pieces until you're ready to rebuild." Something in his voice, the absolute certainty, the lack of judgment, the permission to be weak, finally allowed her to stop fighting. She broke. Completely. Utterly. And he held her through all of it. Later, when she could speak again, she whispered, "What if I can't be strong again? Then I'll be strong enough for both of us. That's what partnership means. What if they're right? What if I am mad? Then we're both mad." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "But I'd rather be mad with you than sane without you. At least our madness saved my life." Despite everything, she laughed, a broken, watery sound. "That's the most ridiculous thing you've ever said." "Good. You're coming back to me." "I'm terrified, Severin." "So am I. Every day." He kissed her forehead. "But we're terrified together. And somehow, that's enough. If you're watching from anywhere in the world and you've ever broken when you needed to be strong, this moment is yours. You're not alone. We see you." The formal proposal came 3 days later. Severin arrived at Moorland Park unannounced, and after speaking with the Marquis, asked Althea to walk with him. They walked through winter gardens, frost crunching beneath their feet. Everything felt sharp, crystalline, real. "Your father has given his blessing," Severin began, then stopped walking. "Althea, I need to be honest with you about what this marriage means. Not the pretty version society tells itself, but the truth. I prefer truth." "I know." He took a breath. "The scandal that killed my father and brother, it wasn't just scandal. It was murder and suicide and 13 years of guilt I carry every day." Althea waited, sensing he needed to purge this poison he'd been carrying. "My brother Edmund was embezzling from our tenants," Severin said, his voice rough. "Stealing rent money from families who were already starving. When father discovered it and confronted him, Edmund, he shot father. Made it look like a hunting accident." His hands clenched into fists. "I was 19. I knew Edmund did it, but I had no proof. Edmund knew I knew." Severin. 3 days later, Edmund rode his horse off the cliffs at Dover. Left a note confessing everything, the embezzlement, the murder, his shame. "The scandal destroyed our family name overnight." His voice cracked. "And I had done nothing. I failed to protect father. Failed to see Edmund's desperation. Failed to stop him before." He turned to face her, and Althea saw tears tracking down his face, the first time she'd witnessed him cry. "That's why I trusted you," he said. "Because you acted when I'd failed to act. You saved someone when I couldn't. And I needed to believe that courage still existed in this world, that I hadn't destroyed it along with my family." Althea's heart broke for him. This dangerous, powerful man who'd carried the weight of murder and suicide and failure for 13 years. Who'd blamed himself for things he couldn't have prevented. "You didn't fail them," she said fiercely. "Edmund made his choices. I should have seen it. Should have known. Should have," his voice broke completely. "I stood there helpless, just like you stood helpless watching your mother die. And that helplessness, it never leaves you, does it? It just waits in your bones, reminding you that you're always one moment away from failing everyone who matters." "No." She took his face in her hands. "Listen to me. We were children bearing burdens that should have been carried by adults. Your brother's crimes, my mother's murder, those weren't our failures. We survived. And now we're choosing to act instead of hiding. That's not failure. That's courage. You're extraordinary, he whispered. So are you. Broken and extraordinary both. He kissed her then, desperate and grateful and real. When they broke apart, he said, I can't promise you'll be happy, Althea. But I can promise you'll never doubt where you stand with me. I can promise partnership, respect, and truth. Always truth. And love? She asked. I don't know what love looks like. I've never experienced it. He held her gaze. But if love is this inability to think clearly when you're in danger, this absolute certainty that I'd rather face ruin beside you than success without you, this bone-deep need to protect and cherish and challenge you in equal measure, then yes. I love you. Despite every reason I shouldn't. Despite being broken. Despite everything. I love you too, she whispered. We're both fractured people who found wholeness in each other's broken edges. Then marry me. Not to protect your reputation. Not out of obligation. But because we choose each other. Because we're brave enough to love despite knowing how badly loss destroys you. Yes. God help us both, yes. The engagement ball at Blackmere Court was a calculated risk. They invited everyone who mattered, including the Rookwoods. The message was clear, we are not hiding. They came. The evening progressed with suffocating normalcy until dinner was announced. As guests filed into the same dining hall where poison had first touched Crystal, Althea felt dread mounting. Dinner proceeded through 3 courses. Then Severin reached for his wine glass. Althea's hand shot out on instinct. Don't. He met her eyes, and she saw understanding flash across his face. He knew the wine was poisoned, had confirmed it with Matthew Blythe that afternoon. Dr. Ashcombe's antidote had been building immunity for weeks. He drank anyway. Time stopped. Althea watched the crystal rise to his lips, watched him swallow, watched the wine slide down his throat. What have you done? She gasped. Something I should have told you about, he said, setting down the glass. Dr. Ashcombe prepared an antidote. I've been protected for weeks. Then his face went gray. Severin? Her voice rose in panic. I'm fine, he said, but sweat beaded his forehead. His pupils dilated. His hand, holding hers, began to tremble. Dr. Ashcombe. Althea screamed. Something's wrong. The physician rushed over, taking Severin's pulse, pulling back his eyelids. His face went white. The dosage was higher than we anticipated. The antidote isn't enough. We need. Severin collapsed. His body seized, back arching, muscles locked in spasm. Blood flecked his lips where he'd bitten his tongue. No, no, no. Althea fell to her knees beside him, cradling his head. The room erupted in chaos around them, but she couldn't hear it. Could only see him dying. Just like her mother. Just like his father. History repeating in an endless loop of helpless watching. Stay with me, she sobbed. Severin, stay with me. You promised. You promised we'd face things together and you're leaving. Not, leaving, he gasped through clenched teeth, his storm gray eyes finding hers even through agony. Never, leaving you. You're dying. You drank poison and you're dying in my arms just like, she couldn't finish. Couldn't breathe. This was her mother's death again. This was his father's death again. This was every nightmare she'd had for weeks made visceral and real. Dr. Ashcombe administered something else, a counteragent, emergency treatment. Seconds stretched into eternities. The seizures continued. Severin's body arched and twisted while Althea held him and prayed to a god she wasn't sure existed. Please. Please. Not him. Not after everything. Please. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the seizure stopped. Severin's breathing steadied. Color seeped back into his face. But for those 5 minutes, Althea had watched him dying. Had felt his life slipping away beneath her hands. had tasted the same powerless terror her father must have felt watching her mother die on cobblestones. When Severin could finally speak, his first words were, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You almost died," she whispered, fury and relief warring in her voice. "You used yourself as bait and almost died, and I had to watch." "I know. I'm sorry. I needed them caught, needed irrefutable proof." "I don't care about proof." Her voice cracked. "I care about you. I care that I almost lost you. I care that you made me watch you drink poison without telling me you might not survive it." Across the room, Justice Aldous Merrick was placing the Rookwoods under arrest. Lady Honoria's mask shattered as she screamed, "It should have worked. You should have died." But Althea barely registered the villain's capture. All she could see was Severin's pale face, all she could feel was the phantom sensation of his body seizing in her arms, all she could taste was the terror of almost loss. "If you ever do something like that again," she said, tears streaming, "I'll poison you myself." Despite everything, he laughed weakly. "That seems fair. Promise me. No more secrets about life-threatening plans." "I promise. From now on, we face danger together. As partners." She kissed him then, tasting blood and terror and gratitude that he'd survived. Around them, constables led the Rookwoods away in chains. Justice had been served. But the cost had been higher than anyone knew. Because Althea would spend the rest of her life remembering those 5 minutes when she'd held him dying, when courage had almost cost her everything that mattered. For everyone watching who's had to choose between safety and truth, between comfort and courage, we see you. Tell us in the comments, have you ever watched someone you love suffer for doing the right thing? You're not alone. The trial of Viscount Percival Rookwood and Lady Honoria Rookwood lasted 3 days and became the most sensational criminal proceeding London had seen in a decade. Every newspaper covered it with breathless detail. Every society matron who'd whispered about Althea's hysteria now claimed they'd always suspected something was amiss about those Rookwoods. Althea testified on the second day, standing before a packed courtroom and recounting exactly what she'd seen that night at Blackmere Court. Under oath, with Mr. Tobias Rennick guiding her through questions, she described the subtle movement of Honoria's hand, the tiny vial, the practiced precision of poisoning. She didn't embellish. Didn't dramatize. Simply told the truth. When the defense attorney, an expensive barrister named Mr. Cornelius Whitmore whom the Rookwoods had somehow scraped together money to hire, tried to discredit her testimony by suggesting feminine hysteria or attention-seeking, Althea met his gaze steadily. "Sir," she said with perfect calm, "either I witnessed attempted murder, or I imagined it. If I imagined it, then how did belladonna come to be in the Duke's wine? Did the poison imagine itself into existence? Did it manifest from my fevered feminine mind into physical reality? Or is it perhaps simpler to accept that I saw exactly what I claimed to see?" The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even the judge smiled. Mr. Whitmore sat down, face flushed with humiliation. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Percival Rookwood was sentenced to transportation to Australia for 20 years. Lady Honoria received 15 years, with possibility of eventual return if she survived the voyage and served her time with good behavior. As the sentence was read, Honoria's eyes found Althea's across the crowded courtroom. There was no defiance left in that gaze, no practiced beauty or calculated charm. Just empty defeat and the bitter knowledge that truth had won after all. Society's response to the verdict was as predictable as it was infuriating. The same ladies who'd cut Althea direct now invited her to tea, eager to hear first-hand accounts of the trial. The same gentlemen who'd avoided her at parties now sought introductions, suddenly fascinated by Lady Althea's remarkable observational skills. Even Lady Sybil Markham, who'd called her hysterical, now proclaimed herself always certain of dear Lady Althea's unimpeachable integrity. "They're shameless," Isidora said one afternoon as another invitation arrived, this one from Lady Ianthe Corwin, who'd been among the cruelest in her whispers. "They crucified you for months, and now they want to celebrate you?" They want to align themselves with the winning side, Althea corrected, setting aside the invitation unopened. It's what people do. I don't blame them for it. But I don't have to accept their sudden friendship either. Will you forgive them? Eventually, perhaps. But I won't forget. And I won't pretend their cruelty didn't matter simply because it's now convenient for them to reverse their positions. The wedding was planned for spring, a June ceremony at Blackmere Court's family chapel, small and private with only those who'd stood by them during the scandal. No grand society affair. No performance for people who'd proven themselves fair-weather friends at best. But first, there was one more matter to address. 3 weeks after the trial concluded, Severin arranged for them to visit Aunt Euphemia in Frome. The elderly lady received them in a sitting room overflowing with cats. Althea counted 12, and Wellington the parrot, who greeted them with a cheerful "murder most foul." "Don't mind Wellington," Euphemia said, waving a hand decorated with rings on every finger. "He's been learning phrases from my law books. I've been following your adventure with great interest, my dear." She studied Althea with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You've had quite the season." "That's one way to phrase it," Althea agreed, accepting tea served by a maid who seemed entirely unbothered by a cat using her shoulder as a perch. "Your mother would be proud," Euphemia continued. "Sabina never could abide injustice or dishonesty. Cost her friends, you know. Cost her comfort. But she never compromised on truth." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "I never married because I valued my independence more than society's approval. But you're managing something rather remarkable. Independence and partnership both. That takes courage." "It takes the right partner," Althea said, glancing at Severin, who was currently being investigated by 3 cats simultaneously. "Indeed." Euphemia's gaze shifted to Severin. "Your Grace, my niece has excellent judgment in most things, but I must ask, are you worthy of her?" "Absolutely not," Severin replied promptly. "But I intend to spend the rest of my life trying to be." Euphemia laughed, delighted. "Good answer. You'll do." She raised her teacup in salute. To truth-tellers and the rare souls brave enough to believe them. They drank tea surrounded by cats and chaos and the comfortable acceptance of someone who'd chosen unconventional paths long before it was fashionable. As they departed, Wellington called after them, "Truth will out. Truth will out." From his beak to God's ears, Althea thought. The wedding day dawned with perfect June weather. Althea woke without fear, only anticipation threaded with joy. Isadora helped her dress in ivory silk, the pearl necklace at her throat. "You're beautiful, Thea." "I'm happy." "You're really getting married." "I really am." The chapel at Blackmere Court was intimate, filled with 30 guests who'd believed when doubt was easier. The Marquis Gideon Morland walked her down the aisle, whispering, "Your mother is here. I feel her presence." Then Althea saw Severin waiting, and everything else faded. His storm-gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that stole her breath. When her father placed her hand in Severin's, his fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, real. Reverend Josiah Bell conducted the traditional ceremony. But after the final blessing, before pronouncing them married, Severin asked permission to speak. "Althea," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "the church requires certain vows. But I want to make others. Private promises that matter more than tradition." He took both her hands. "I vow to always trust you, even when trust is difficult. Even when the world demands doubt. Even when my own fears whisper that safety lies in skepticism. Your word will always be enough for me. I vow to stand beside you when you break, not just when you're strong. To hold your pieces when courage crumbles. To remind you who you are when the world tries to convince you otherwise. I vow to build a life worthy of your mother's sacrifice and your father's faith. To honor the courage that saved my life by living that life with purpose and integrity. And I vow to love you not just in triumph, but in failure. Not just in health, but in sickness. Not just when you're easy to love, but when you're difficult, frightened, angry, or broken. Because you loved me when I was all those things. And that's what marriage means. Tears streamed freely down Althea's face. When she spoke, her voice shook but held. Severin, I vow to tell you truth, even when lies would be kinder. Even when truth is costly. Even when silence would be safer. Because our love was built on trust, and trust requires honesty. I vow to act when action is needed, but to include you in dangerous plans. Because partnership means sharing both safety and risk. I vow to remember my mother's courage and my father's faith, and to pass both to our children. So they know that standing for truth is worth any cost. And I vow to love you through your nightmares and mine. Through guilt and grief and the ghosts we both carry. Because you chose to believe me when the world called me mad. And that's worth every vow I could ever make. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Even Severin had tears tracking down his face as he kissed his bride. The wedding breakfast was held in the same dining hall where poison had changed their lives. But today there was no danger, just sunshine, laughter, and joy. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they found themselves in the gilded drawing room where everything had begun. Regretting anything yet? Severin asked, wrapping his arms around her. Not even a little. You? Only that it took poisoning to meet you. You require drama. Anything less wouldn't have held your attention. He turned her to face him, expression growing serious. Today isn't the end of our challenges. Society will always remember. Some doors will remain closed. Being my wife won't be easy. Being anyone's wife wouldn't be easy. But being your wife, being your partner, your equal, your match, that's worth any difficulty. She touched his face. We saved each other, Severin. You gave me belief when the world demanded doubt. I gave you truth when lies were easier. That's not a weakness. That's our foundation. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, with passion enriched by certainty and choice and love freely given. They danced that evening in the ballroom, just the two of them after guests departed, with only moonlight and memory for company. The same room where danger had lurked now held only promise. From wherever you're watching tonight, city apartment or countryside cottage, alone or with loved ones, tell us, do you believe in love built on trust and truth rather than just passion? We need to hear from you. 10 years passed like water, swift in memory, rich in detail. The Duke and Duchess of Blackmere became known for progressive salons and social reforms. Althea published 3 books on women's education and social justice. They championed workers' rights in Severin's mills and mines. Their son Cassian arrived 18 months after the wedding, not their first child, but their first living child. 3 months after their wedding, Althea had discovered she was pregnant. 2 weeks later, she'd woken to blood and pain and the knowledge that the baby was gone. Dr. Ashcombe said the stress of the trial had been too much. For 3 days, Althea couldn't speak. On the 4th day, Severin found her in the nursery. They'd started preparing and held her while she sobbed. I'm sorry, she'd whispered. I wanted to give you a child. You will. When we're both ready. When the world is kinder. When we've healed. He'd kissed her forehead. Right now, I just need you to survive. That's enough. When Cassian finally arrived, they loved him with the fierce, grateful intensity of parents who knew how easily life could slip away. 3 years later, daughter Rowena was born with golden curls and her father's stubborn determination. In the 8th year of their marriage, the Marquis Gideon Morland's health began declining. His heart weakened despite Dr. Ashcombe's best efforts. While sorting through her father's papers after one particularly difficult visit, Althea found a sealed letter addressed to her in her mother's handwriting. The date was 1 week before Lady Sabina died. Her hand shook as she broke the wax. My dearest Thea. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Your father promised to keep this letter safe and give it to you when you were old enough to understand. I hope he's chosen the right moment. I hope you found happiness. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I fear it will be. I'm writing this because I need you to know something. I see you, my darling girl. I see how you watch people, how you notice what others miss, How your mind works like a well-oiled clock while you pretend to be just another pretty face. I see your intelligence frightening the very people who should celebrate it. I see you feeling out of place in the only world you've ever known. I understand, because I felt it too. That sense of being a stranger in your own life. Of seeing clearly while everyone around you chooses blindness. Of knowing truth that no one wants to hear. Here's what I need you to know, that feeling, that outsider, clear-seeing, truth-telling part of you, is not a flaw. It's a gift. A dangerous gift, yes. A costly gift, certainly. But a gift nonetheless. The world will try to convince you that women shouldn't see so clearly. Shouldn't speak so honestly. Shouldn't act so courageously. They'll call you difficult, hysterical, mad. They'll try to shame you into comfortable silence. Don't let them. I know I'm asking you to be brave in ways that might cost you everything. But Thea, my darling, brilliant girl, a life lived in comfortable lies is no life at all. It's a slow death of the soul. Better to burn briefly with truth than smolder endlessly in silence. I don't know what specific challenge you'll face. But I know my daughter. And I know you'll face it with courage that runs in your blood. When you do, when you stand alone with truth while the world demands lies, remember this, I'm proud of you. Not because you're obedient or proper. But because you're you. Complicated, brilliant, brave, true. And remember too, you're never truly alone. I walk with you in every courageous choice. And somewhere in this world, there's someone who will choose to believe you when belief is difficult. Someone worthy of the remarkable woman you'll become. Wait for them, Thea. They exist. I promise. I love you beyond measure. Beyond death. Beyond whatever comes after. Your courage is my legacy. Live it proudly. Always, Mother. Althea read the letter 3 times before she could breathe. Then she carried it to Severin and let him read it while she wept against his shoulder. She knew, Althea whispered. She knew I'd face something like this. She knew I'd need permission to be brave. She raised you well. His voice was rough. And she was right. You found someone who believes you. Who stands with you. Who's grateful every day that you were brave enough to change both our lives. They framed the letter. Hung it in their private chambers. And when Althea doubted herself, she'd read her mother's words and remember, courage was her legacy. 2 months later, the Marquis died. On his last day, he asked to speak with Althea alone. His voice was barely a whisper. Do you remember what I told you about your mother? That women who see clearly are dangerous to those who profit from blindness. I remember, Father. I was afraid for you. Afraid you'd inherited her courage and it would destroy you the way it destroyed her. His hand found hers. But I was wrong to be afraid. Your courage saved you. Saved the Duke. Maybe saved others we'll never know about. Tears streamed down her face. Mother would be proud? Your mother is proud. I feel her here. She's been waiting for me. He smiled. Tell our grandchildren about her. About both of us. Tell them truth matters, even when truth is costly. Promise me. I promise, Father. I promise. He died holding her hand, his last word her childhood nickname, Thea. That night, curled against Severin with their children asleep nearby, Althea finally understood what her parents had given her, the belief that standing for truth was worth any cost. Thank you for standing with me, she whispered. So I never had to stand alone. Always. Until my last breath, I stand with you. But 3 months after her father's death, on the anniversary of the first poisoning attempt, the nightmares found Severin. Althea woke to him screaming, a raw, animal sound. He was shaking, face gray in moonlight, breath ragged. When she touched him, he flinched. Severin? I'm sorry. I was dreaming. He pressed his hands to his face. I was drinking the wine again, but this time the antidote didn't work. And you were watching me die. Just watching, unable to do anything. Exactly the way I watched my father bleed out. The way I stood useless while Edmund confessed and rode toward the cliffs. You were watching me die and I couldn't tell you it wasn't your fault, that you'd done everything right, that I loved you. His voice broke. And then I woke up and for a moment I couldn't remember if the antidote had worked. If I'd survived or if this was death and you were just a dream I was having as my brain shut down and I'd never actually lived these 10 years. Never married you. Never held our children. Never. He was crying now, truly crying. Althea pulled him into her arms, cradling his head against her chest. I'm real. This is real. You survived. We're here, together, alive. I'm terrified, he whispered. Every day, I'm terrified. That I'll lose you the way I lost them. That something will happen and I'll be standing there useless again. Watching the person I love most die while I do nothing. Severin. I know I appear strong. Cold. Controlled. But I'm terrified every moment of every day. Terrified I'll fail to protect you. Fail our children. Fail everyone who matters the way I failed my father and brother. You didn't fail them. I should have seen it. Should have stopped it. He met her eyes, tears tracking down his face. That's why I drank the poisoned wine even though it terrified you. Because I couldn't stand by helpless again. Because doing nothing while death approaches is worse than any risk. Althea understood finally and fully. His need for control. His desperate protectiveness. It wasn't bravery. It was terror translated into action. Listen to me, she said firmly. You cannot control death. You can't protect everyone all the time. But you can choose to live fully now. To love without reservation. To trust that we're both fighting every day to stay alive for each other. That's all anyone can do. What if it's not enough? Then we'll have loved beautifully while we could. And that will have to be enough. He held her desperately, and she held him back with equal desperation. Two fractured people who'd found wholeness in each other's broken edges. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Severin arranged for them to return to Blackmere Court alone. Dinner was served in the same hall where everything had begun. Feeling nostalgic? She asked. Grateful. I wanted to return to where it all started and remember how fortunate I am. We both are. He raised his glass. To the woman who saved my life in more ways than one. To 10 years, 2 remarkable children, and a love I never expected to find. To second chances, Althea added. And adventures yet to come. He produced a leather box, his mother's sapphire necklace. It belonged to my mother. My father gave it to her on their 10th anniversary. Tears filled her eyes as he fastened it around her throat. Do you remember what you said to me? That first night? I trust you. 3 words that changed everything. They kissed deeply, thoroughly, with passion enriched by years of partnership and love. Later that night in bed, Althea thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd felt out of place, who'd worried she'd never find someone who understood her. That girl had been brave enough to spill wine and face scandal, brave enough to trust a dangerous duke, brave enough to love without reservation. What are you thinking? Severin asked. That I'm happy. Truly, completely happy. Good. That's all I ever wanted for you. For us, she corrected. We're a team. The best team in England. Possibly the world. Definitely the world. She smiled in darkness, listening to night sounds, owls calling, wind and trees, the fountain where their children played. This was her life. Beautiful, chaotic, perfect. And it had started with 3 words, I trust you. If you're still with us after this journey, tell us in the comments, which moment broke your heart? Where are you watching from? Because this story, built on trust and trauma and love that survives suffering, is for you. Thank you for being here. In the years to come, when Cassian and Rowena asked how their parents met, Althea and Severin would exchange knowing glances and smile. It's quite a story, Severin would say. The best stories always are, Althea would add. Their legacy extended beyond titles or wealth. It lived in reforms they'd championed, books Althea wrote, the example they set of marriage built on equality and respect. When finally, many years later, they were laid to rest together in the family chapel at Blackmere Court, the inscription on their shared monument read simply, "Here lie Severin and Althea Blackmere. He trusted her. She saved him. Together they changed the world." It was, everyone agreed, the perfect epitaph for the perfect love story. But the real legacy wasn't carved in stone. It lived in every person who'd heard their story and chosen to believe someone when belief was difficult. In every individual who'd spoken truth when lies were easier. In every couple who'd built love on trust rather than just passion. The Duke and Duchess of Blackmere had proven that sometimes the greatest loves emerge from the darkest moments. That courage, whether facing down murderers or facing your own heart, is always rewarded. That truth, no matter how inconvenient, is always worth fighting for. And that 3 simple words, "I trust you," can change everything. To everyone who stayed through this entire journey, thank you. If this tale touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and tell us, where are you watching from, and what moment will stay with you forever? At the end of this video, another romantic tale awaits. Click and let yourself be swept away. Until next time, from all of us here, thank you for believing in love stories that matter.